You are listening to the Julie Parker Practice Success Podcast, where you discover management insights and strategies for your successful dental practice. There are also interviews with key people in the industry who have advice and services to help you and your team achieve great success. Welcome to this episode of the Julie Parker Practice Success Podcast. And today I am tackling one of the biggest problems when we are talking about employee contractor dentists that there is today. And as my guest mentioned before, it's a bit of a debacle. And so we've already done a couple of episodes on this topic, but things keep changing. And so it's very important that we keep abreast of all these changes, because I'm hoping, fingers crossed, this change is actually working in our favour. Welcome, Sarah Bartholomeusz, Principal of U Legal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And I also welcome my buddy, my partner in crime, Ameena Basile, who is dental management expertise, and together we are Dental Business Mastery. Welcome, Meenie. Thanks so much for helping out in this episode.
Thank you so much, ladies, for having me join this interesting conversation.
Because this is an interesting topic for you as well, isn't it, Meenie? You and I get questions around this all the time.
It's a topic that's actually been driving me nuts for quite some time, and all these SFAs coming into place has been a practice management consulting nightmare.
Just to put everyone in the context of today's conversation, I'm going to hark back to when I was employing dentists back many years ago, over 2 decades ago. And my experience prior to that, working in dental practices, it all seemed pretty simple and straightforward. As a practice principal, you employed an employee dentist. They wore your uniform, they used your stationery, they got paid into your bank account, which you would then pay them a wage from, a commission from. They would abide by all of your practice systems and policies, etc. They turn up to team meetings as well, all the things, and they would get a commission. They'd get a percentage, anywhere back then it was kind of ranging between 32 to 40%, depending on their level of experience. They'd get that commission payment, and then they would do with that whatever they liked. They'd incorporate their super, any annual leave, all those sort of things are incorporated into that commission, which is what commission's all about. And then as time rolled on, we started to hear word that what we were doing was actually never completely legal, that from a tax perspective, ATO and State Revenue Office perspective, we were employing people as employees but treating them as contractors. And therefore, and there was a case going back a few years ago now that went through to the courts. It seemed clear to everybody else that that person was in that old traditional kind of arrangement. You're treated like an employee, but we're paying you as a contractor. But there was never supposed to be holiday leave, etc. on top of that. And the court ruled in the employee dentist's favour and gave them a payout. And then everyone went, oh my God. And then we had a whole bunch of SFAs, so service facilities agreements, and different ways of employing dentists to try to get around this. But the interesting thing in my mind was always the old way was simple, and the old way suited both the employer and the employee as well. And everyone just wanted to try to get back to that space again, because the ruling indicated that to be able to treat an employee dentist as a true contractor, they would have to be paid 100% of their fees into their own bank account, using their own FPOS terminals, using their own letterhead, and not wearing the team uniform and not participating in team meetings and abiding by the policies and systems of that practice. And so that seemed quite unworkable as well for a dental practice. But now there seems to have been another court ruling where a judge said, no, contract is king. Whatever's in the contract, whether they're treated like an employee and paid on commission as a contractor, that's actually okay. And since then, I've heard that another court case has gone through that belies that as well. And so we're hoping, Sarah, you will be the angel from legal heaven that comes down and helps us understand where are we at just right now. We're not into the future, just right now. Sarah, over to you.
Oh my goodness, what an intro. Yes. I think the summary that you gave just shows just how complex this area is. And the area is sort of covering employees, contractors, and then what we now see as a very common arrangement, which is a services arrangement. And that services arrangement is akin to a co-working space, I suppose, where there's certain services that are provided. And so the professional comes in, does their work, and goes and pays a fee, including a room rental fee and a fee for the services that the services entity provides, being reception, potentially nursing staff, dental assistants, all of those things, which then is again a separate arrangement. And so, like, there's no real right way to do this, I think, is the answer. It really depends on your business, which is why your business exists, to be able to help people navigate these areas. And always I would suggest getting legal advice to work out that once you've commercially worked out what's best for you, make sure that you check. Accountants often have great ways to guide people in terms of tax as well, and then having what you've agreed reflected in an agreement is important. So where shall we start? The first case that sort of got this payroll tax issue relevant for people was many years ago, and it was called optical superstores. And that was a case about opticians who, as Julie said, would turn up. They had to wear the uniform, and they were essentially, the court said, employees, not independent contractors like their agreement said. And that case was then relied on this new case that has become the hot property of every medical lawyer and accountant around, because there's no way that we know 100% how to navigate the issue of payroll tax being applied to people that businesses thought were independent of them. So the case was, for anybody who wants to look it up, called Thomas and Nas, and it's actually about a GP practice, which, as you know, they tend to structure their staffing in very similar way to dental practices. And the doctors in that case had a number of doctors that worked over their practices, and the tribunal, actually, not a court, found that they were employees under the payroll tax legislation. So payroll tax legislation is harmonised, so basically the same across the east coast of Australia. WA does things a bit differently sometimes, so they've got slightly different provisions. But what they said is something Julie mentioned, which was the flow of money was one of the really big reasons that they said the doctors were employees. So the money would go into the service entity's account and then go out to the doctors. And that was essentially one of the main reasons that the tribunal said that it was a relevant contract under the payroll tax legislation. There were also other things, and so we've been working with medical practices and dental practices to overcome other issues. So there was a restraint that the Dr. Thomas had on his doctors. They weren't allowed to work certain places or certain areas, and other provisions that made the court or tribunal say that they were employees under that particular legislation, and they had to pay $800,000 back payroll tax.
You see, that would cripple most standard-sized dental practices.
I know, it's a huge amount to just suddenly have to find. And so they did appeal a couple of times, but they have been denied the appeal, and now all of the state revenue officers are onto this and doing audits, and it can be very stressful to go through that. Obviously, you can't change the past, but making sure that you're looking at the arrangement that you've got now, because you don't want to be surprised by that sort of, or any bill. Payroll tax also has a threshold, so it's different in every state and territory. So taking a look at the State Revenue Office to see, I was talking to someone in WA this week, and they were actually they were very worried about this, but they were well below. Their practice was just smaller, and so it was a good time to get in touch because they were planning to grow. So making sure that they were structured in the way to minimise the risk as much as possible.
Yeah. And, you're talking about one of the key things as well, because we've really got to get in people's minds that we say contractor, SFA, that's the solution to things. To me, that's no solution whatsoever. Because in essence, if people out there can consider the bookkeeper that you've employed to come on site half a day a week to get all your books done, but has a whole series of clients elsewhere, and you have no control over who she takes on as another client. You have no control over what she wears to work when she turns up. She's completely independent. She doesn't have to turn up to any of your team meetings and all the things, even though she's a big stakeholder in the business. But that's the relationship that a true contractor poses to a dental practice when it's the dentist or the hygienist or whoever. Let's just talk about the dentists. When it's the dentist. And that means they could turn around and open up next door and contact their patients, and that's all okay.
And one of the things Thomas and Naz talked about was who owns the patients as a big thing, because if they're independent, then like the bookkeeper example, they belong to the dentist, not to the practice.
Yeah, that's right. And there's, we all know that we can't own human beings, but we can have the right to contact them and say, come and see me down the road.
However, it's not really a fair statement, in my opinion, is it? Because the practice owner has gone to an enormous amount of expense and effort to set up the business, market, recruit staff, all these sorts of things. So they're actually getting the traffic for that dentist.
Yes.
And for each of these arguments they're putting up, the payroll tax office, if you like, I think there's a fair argument against every single point they make, because it's not a profitable exercise. It's not a workable exercise for a dental practice to go about recruiting dentists like this. And the same with GP practices, from my experience.
So what we're seeing actually is a lot more practices employing professional staff, because you do have that level of control, like you say, Ameena, that protects your business, and because it's such a complex area of the law, there's local regulations, there's state laws, there's federal laws, there's tax laws, there's payroll tax laws, and they all overlay each other to make, like Julie did such a good summary at the beginning about all the different things that can go into whether someone is classified as an employee or as a contractor or as running their own business from your services entity, that it's not something that people can just figure out on their own.
What impact did that, or was it late 2021 or early 2022, where the High Court said that no, contractor is king? What impact did that have, and has that had a subsequent ruling around it that makes that now obsolete?
Yeah, so that case was basically what is in the agreement is what the law says it is. You say you're a contractor, you're a contractor. So that's what I'm saying about all the overlaying. But then the payroll tax legislation focuses more on that flow of money and how the money gets. And so talking about bookkeepers, if the bookkeeper's saying wages, and that's what's going out to the dentists, then that's something that an audit will look at. So there's so many different layers to this that, there's no easy answers, unfortunately, unless you just want to employ people and pay the tax.
Yeah, and I know that my younger sister, who's a bookkeeper for dental practices, brilliant, brilliant gal, Jenny, JP Professional Services. She and I went away for a weekend together with a good buddy of hers, and I used to employ her as well, the lovely Kelly. And the three of us just sat there and nutted out an Excel document with a whole bunch of formulas that had the ability to be able to pay, in essence, that percentage to a dentist, but actually have it divided up with all the other entitlements, take into consideration the hourly rate, and it would have to be redressed every 6 months or year to make sure the hourly rate was truly reflective of what this person was doing. We got to the end of that weekend and we're like, we're brilliant, this is awesome, this is the answer, but it was too complex.
Yes.
Number one, for the user to use it, and number two, for the employee dentist to understand truly.
Yes.
So I am still getting that actual
the same amount.
It looks like I'm getting less, and so it's unworkable from that perspective. So what do you find?
I think what you're saying as well is like, what's the appetite of dentists to be employees? If a practice decides that that's the best process for them, actually getting people to say yes to that is a different thing altogether. I talked to a general practice manager this week, and she rang me and she said, we're going to make all our GPs employees. And I said, have you asked them? Like, are they?
No, I've deemed it to be so.
Are they open to it? I don't want to create an agreement for you if you haven't talked to them about it yet, because we do find a lot of health professionals, they want the flexibility of having that independent status.
Yeah. So you're saying that we're still in this flux.
We are.
We are. So what are you finding yourself? How are you directing and guiding your clients?
And I think that we will be in a state of flux until there's more case law. And the thing about case law is it takes years. So it will take another couple of Dr. Thomases to go through and with different arrangements to make sure, or to test what we think is the best thing to do. So how we're working is we are doing more employment agreements for professional staff than we've ever done before. So people are taking that option where they can work out with their budgeting to pay this tax. Often it's the patients that are going to pay for that, because it's got to work financially, which is what you help your clients with, working that, modelling out. And then also services agreements. So those services and facilities agreement where it is much more independent, there's less control, that the patient belongs to that professional, and it's genuinely kind of managing the risks that came out of Thomas and Nas. But the other thing about risk is you can't run a business without risk. And so we have some clients who, like you said, Ameena, you can't do that. You've invested all this in the brand, who say, we're based in a rural location. We don't want someone setting up. We're going to include that restraint, and we at least know we're taking the risk on it. And so that's what we like to do with our clients. We like them to understand the risks, but especially very entrepreneurial dentists, they will push the boundaries, and at least they know what they're doing and they can budget for that.
And so the risk is, on one side, I'm going to employ my employees under an employment contract and pay them as a contractor. The risk I run is that I'm going to get a payroll tax bill at some point. But at least I don't go to the risk of having this person take any of my client base when they move on. And the risk of having the SFA is that I'll be compliant with the SRO and ATO and all of that, but I risk, if this person ever moves on, they could be really quite damaging and losing who knows amount of money from the business.
And I just, if we take a holistic view at these issues, there is so many issues surrounding healthcare, and particularly in the last few years, the government have done a great job of making it difficult for healthcare providers to be passionate about this space. They've had so many challenges. We have shortages, particularly of doctors. Mm-hmm. And we're just adding more and more challenges. It is also so much more challenging now than 20 years ago to be profitable in a dental practice or in a medical practice. And all we're doing is deterring people from this profession and making it more and more difficult. And it's hard yakka being a dentist, working in a space, the big as the oral cavity, 8 hours a day, hunched over. And the profitability is harder. They work very hard. It is hard work. And now we're adding more and more challenges. The other thing is, if you're an intelligent associate, you want to be part of that team because that's going to make you more successful, which at the end of the day is going to increase your reputation, your pocket, what you take home in your pocket, all those sorts of things. So they do want to willingly be part of that team and wear the uniform and all these things because that in turn will benefit them.
Yes.
And the thing about creating a salary for them too, a big part of having a really good associate is that they have got fire in their belly to do other things. They're going to start learning implants. They're going to try and get really good case acceptance from their patient. They're going to offer really good service. I mean, when you're getting, this particular base rate perhaps, and you don't have that autonomy around your income so much, the motivation is lacking. I just find in every angle I look at that it's not a workable exercise, and let sleeping dogs lie. Let's make it easy for these people. We're losing too much of the health profession.
Yeah, what you haven't mentioned as well in that is that for dentists, the startup costs are crazy compared to other health professions. The investment that you have to make if you want to go and start your own practice will take years to pay back. So you've got to work that into your calculations as well.
Yeah, and people actually, it's underestimated, like a GP practice to a dental practice. What do they need? A chair, a stethoscope, and a script pad.
Or a psychologist to a dentist.
And even, I think dentists are seen because it's an out-of-pocket cost.
Yes.
As these huge, big money makers. But what we're forgetting is these private practice owners of a dental practice are running, in essence, a mini hospital because it's the same processes, the same types of costs, the nursing, the sterilisation. That's why they were referred to as dental surgeons. They're doing a minor procedure or surgery every time. So, it's just blown completely out of the water.
And the same regulations as well as a hospital, but in a small business.
And very hard they're difficult places to manage. They really are.
And it's the same. It really surprises me because it's the same with how many industries would want to pay their practitioners in this way, not just dental, medical, physio, but in your world too, lawyers would be the law firm would be exactly the same thing, wouldn't it? Are you finding this in your firm?
In our industry, it's slightly different. We don't have to wear uniforms. We don't. The money tends to flow. In the case of barristers, for example, they all share a space and they have a brand that they go under, but they get paid directly from their clients. So it's quite a different scenario. Also, we don't get paid by the government or by health funds. So that's a complicating factor as well. Like medical practices are underpinned by the government. Dental practices are sort of out there in this wild west of having to deal with health funds who limit what you can charge and don't always pay on time, as I understand it, from client feedback. So I think it is a lot more difficult to run a dental practice if you don't have, because I think that there are some Medicare rebates sometimes.
Limited things.
But it's such an important service as well for our health industry. It's just not valued by the government the same way, I don't think.
And with more and more research about how oral health, how much of an impact that has on our overall health, it's just ridiculous how undermined it is, really.
And I've talked to some clients in the last couple of weeks who've had ideas about how to create more sustainable practices for themselves and create like membership arrangements. But it's such a highly regulated space that they initially need to spend quite a few $1,000s to get advice to see if their idea is allowable. And then there's hurdles of how to make it attractive for patients, because we know some people are afraid to go to the dentist, but we also know, Ameena, as you're saying, how important it is to avoid other chronic health conditions as well.
So I look at the SFAs. I don't see that as a solution, yet everyone seems to be doing it. Why?
It's the best solution at the moment that we have to avoid payroll tax. So it depends really on what your priorities are as a practice owner. Is it to avoid paying this tax? If so, there's two ways to go about it that we think are best practice at the moment: changing that flow of money, creating the SFA that's like the co-working space, or employing professional staff. There's really only two ways to go.
And my understanding, Sarah, of an SFA, I'm working with some clients who are using this system. To me, really, if you analyse it, it looks like exactly what we were doing before as contract dentists, and just with lots of added administration, if you like, to make it all fit the bill in the eyes of these government organisations.
It should be reflective of the way that the organisation is actually dealing with that professional person. So you can't just put things in for the sake of it. Any audit will check all of that, and the Thomas and Nas case talks about that. Like, you can't just say they're a tenant, but the way that you act, as Julie says, make them come to meetings or make them wear the uniform, depending on how you do their marketing, your marketing of them on your website is an important thing as well. So I think practices, as far as I can tell, are genuinely trying to get as compliant as they can to avoid any back tax. But it can seem like you're just jumping through hoops for the sake of it, I'm sure.
Because for them to be compliant, they need to have separate FPOS terminals for each one of their dentists. Yes. They need to make sure those dentists do not wear that uniform. They are not compelled to run by the policies and systems of that practice. They can market themselves independently. Yes. They own the patients that they see. They have every right to contact them beyond. I don't see practices actually complying with the SFA, even though they've got one, and they think that by adjusting the SFA itself is going to save them. But if they're audited, it certainly will not.
That's correct.
One of the biggest frustrations I have with this whole SFA arrangement is that from an accounting perspective, when you get a profit and loss, it's very complicated. So you don't get, because of the way the funds are dispersed and held in an account for the associates and all these things, you get a profit and loss. It really doesn't mean anything. You've got to, put everything together it's not simple reporting.
Yeah, it's essentially, rather than being a dental practice, although it is a dental practice, you have to have the accreditations and everything, you're running a serviced office. And so you don't have that same turnover visibility. And you also have to rely potentially on the professional staff to do their bookkeeping before you get and pay you in a timely way. So it's very frustrating for cash flow for dental practices as well.
Have you heard if there's any impact or any requirements from a perspective of the dental practice management software that we all use to house all of our patient charting and notes and tracks their appointment times and payments? Is there an impact in that space as well? If people are under an SFA, would they need to have their own independent software?
They don't necessarily need to have their own independent software. That can be part of the services that the practice provides. But there are some of those softwares that are now updating their systems to be able to do the payments differently.
That's
updating things for the way that that practices are running things now.
Mm.
And also, one thing I think that people forget is the practice owner also needs to have an agreement with the practice. So dentists often are contracting to their own business in a separate entity, whether it's their family trust or as in their own name under an ABN. And we see a lot of them forget that they actually are an important fee earner in the business and should either be employees or independently contracted as well.
Yeah. And I know that after one of my previous discussions on this podcast on this very topic, one of the things to always keep in mind as a principal dentist out there is that if you've got a long-term dentist that's been working within your facility, either as an employee or contractor or a mixture of both, and they're really part of that practice and you would hate to see them go and they've been there for a long time, part of the goodwill is because of them, then certainly I encourage you to start thinking about bringing them on as an actual partner as well.
Yes.
And you know, maybe that's a nice benefit that comes from it, that you start to really get this core group of practice owners who are in partnership and have a reduced risk around this space.
Yeah, and if they have an appetite for that, that's absolutely an excellent thing to start thinking about for succession and risk sharing and all of those things as well.
Yeah. So we need them to be under SFAs. How do we protect our businesses as well? Are there any answers around that?
I think
rather than just going off the integrity of the person we're employing.
Yeah, I think it depends on the business. So it depends on the structure that's going to work best for you. And really, doing those reference checks and having good relationships with people is always important in business anyway.
And you've hit on something very important there. When you never really know a person until you've gotten to know them. And so once you have done your best to employ people who seem to be of good character and integrity and they start working for you, then do whatever you can to have a very mutually beneficial relationship there, very much win-win. So if for some reason that person decided to move on somewhere else, they're not going to be mean-spirited about it because that relationship's been so harsh. And so do your best to, have the bigger picture in mind and just recognise that having a relationship where it's a win-win situation, sometimes you win and sometimes you don't win as much, but make it quite balanced. And then so you've got some form of respect and likability there where you can part ways more happily.
Yeah, well, that's important. The culture is important for your business, and that will be reflected in those relationships as well.
Yeah. So, Sarah, flipping over to You Legal, tell us about You Legal, the services that you provide, who you look after. How can we get people to contact you to get some help?
Sure. So we, about 5 years ago, flipped from being mainly working with corporates to working with health professionals. And the reason is I come from a medical family. So dental surgeons, GPs, physios, the whole works. And it also, that's a cohort of people that I care about and want to take care of, and had heard about them seeing professionals who maybe weren't necessarily keeping their best interests at heart. And also we wanted to do good in the world as a law firm. So we wanted to help people who help people. And there's not many lawyers who can say that every day they go to work and it's for the greater good. So we try to work to protect practices through having the right agreements in place, making sure you've got your shareholders agreement in place, making sure that you're being taken care of when a partner's joining or leaving, so that there is less opportunity for disputes. So I worked as a litigation lawyer for the first 5 years of my practice, and I just didn't like people fighting all the time. And I saw that there was this opportunity to put things in place to avoid disputes, or at least if there was one, have a clear document about what needs to happen. So we do deal with some icky things, like if health professionals have got letters from AHPRA, we'll work with people through that, or some insurance issues we can work with people on. But our strong preference is to check leases and prepare agreements and advise people before they start undertaking tricky regulatory, because the other thing we haven't really talked about is dentistry is so highly regulated that if you are an entrepreneurial dentist, to be able to challenge some of those regulations, it can be good to know what you're doing before you, like what the risks are before you start doing that.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that, there isn't a clear-cut answer to the issue that's been the topic of this podcast. But you're right, business, there are elements of risk in business, and it's all part and parcel of going down that entrepreneurial journey. And it is about balancing it out. We do that in life all the time.
Absolutely.
We're always facing some kind of risk moving forward, but certainly make a sound business decision with advice from yourself, understanding all the complexities around it, understanding what's going to be good for the business as well. Do whatever you can to build good, healthy relationships and maintain those as well, hire well, and you can still thrive at the end of the day. And we just always keep our fingers crossed that one day the light will be seen and there will be a combination employee, contractor, legal arrangement that we can all just rely upon and put it all to bed and just get on with making patients healthy and our businesses viable.
And that continuous learning is something that we haven't talked about, but listening to podcasts like this and making sure that you're across changes in the industry that maybe your accountant hasn't told you about or you haven't seen on the online forums. Like there's different ways to make sure that you're properly informed.
Beautiful, beautiful. And if anyone is interested in that Excel document that my sister and Kelly and I put together over that weekend, even though it's a little bit complex, there's a doing session, a training session on that for all of our club members. They get free access to that. Well, not free, they pay their monthly amount, but that is one of the training videos that is in there, and they can get that template themselves and contact us if they'd like any questions answered about it. But if people wanted to reach out and speak to you and get your advice, Sarah, what is their best first step?
Probably our website is youlegal.com.au. There's a few different ways to contact us there, depending on what works for people. And if they're a podcast person, my new podcast, Hacking Health, is just out, so search that. I'm going to be talking to lots of medtech founders and health tech founders to talk about ways to make healthcare more accessible for people. So if you've got any ideas about people I could interview, let me know.
That is tremendous. We'll have all of those links in the show notes. Meenie, did you have anything else to?
No, but it was an enjoyable conversation. I was getting quite passionate there. It really annoys me, but
You're warranted to get upset about it. Well, thank you, Sarah. Your contribution has been absolutely brilliant and so appreciated. And I know everyone out there is always interested in hearing what's the latest in this space. So encouraging that it may take many court cases and years to get to the next step. But we're all in it for the journey. So thank you so very much for helping us there.
It was delightful to meet you, Sarah.
Great to talk to you guys.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, then you should come along and join the club. The club is a whole library of lunch and learns, with new lunch and learns being produced all the time that help your dental team gain greater success in your systems, in your team behaviours, in your patient management, in your patient engagement, in their treatment plans. They are usually around half an hour in length, and so team members can sit down, be paid for their lunch break, eat lunch while they're being inspired and delivered all of these insights and strategies that can be implemented so you all achieve greater levels of success. Also, Ameena and I, my buddy from Dental Management Expertise, have a company, Dental Business Mastery, together. And our flagship online 1-year course for dental practice managers and dental practice owners to learn how to very successfully manage your dental practice is available. Head over to dentalbusinessmastery.com.au to find out more information, and has information about any other courses that we've got available. Also, make sure you do jump onto my website, julieparkerpracticesuccess.com.au, and you will see a whole load of free information. There are articles, the blog, downloads, templates, a whole load of things that are designed to help you overcome any specific challenge that you've got going on in your practice at the moment. If you have any suggestions of topics or guests that I can have on the podcast, please let me know. Thanks for listening.